Still renting? God, Isla, you're 33. My cousin didn't say it quietly. He announced it across my parents' dining room table, with 17 family members seated around him, plates of turkey and stuffing in front of everyone, wine glasses half full, and the kind of Thanksgiving silence that follows a comment no one quite knows whether to laugh at or ignore. He had waited, I think, for exactly the right moment, when the table was quiet enough for every word to carry. He smiled at his girlfriend beside him, like he had just delivered a perfectly timed joke. I looked back at him steadily and said, "Actually, I own a house. My name is Isla. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a senior environmental consultant for a mid-sized private firm based in Calgary. My work takes me to project sites across Alberta, and sometimes into BC, reviewing land use plans, writing environmental impact assessments, and helping developers and municipalities meet provincial and federal compliance standards. I spent years building that career quietly and deliberately, and I'm proud of what it took to get there. But none of it ever seemed to matter once I walked through my parents' front door in Edmonton. In my family, the measure of a successful woman was simple and non-negotiable. Did she own property? Was she married? Roughly in that order, or close enough. My cousin Dex had checked both boxes by the time he turned 30, and he had never once allowed anyone to forget it. Dex is my father's sister's son. We grew up in the same city, went to the same university 3 years apart, and both ended up working in fields connected to development. Him on the money side in real estate, me on the regulatory and environmental side. By most definitions, he did well. He bought a house in a good neighborhood. He drove a truck that announced itself. He got engaged to his girlfriend Camille, and the whole family treated the announcement like a national event. None of that was the problem. The problem was what Dex believed those accomplishments entitled him to say to other people. Growing up, I was never the golden child. That role belonged to my cousin by default, not because he was kinder or more capable, but because he was louder. He had a gift for controlling the conversation at family gatherings, for making his wins sound inevitable, and other people's circumstances sound like choices they had made poorly. When I left Edmonton right after graduating to take a contract position in Calgary, Dex told everyone I was running away because I couldn't find something real locally. When I changed firms 2 years later for a better opportunity, he told my aunt I was unstable. When I didn't bring anyone home for Christmas, the year I turned 29, he spent the entire evening making small, precise comments about my priorities. They were always phrased as concern. That was what made them impossible to answer without sounding defensive. My parents were not unkind people. They were simply the kind of people who believed that keeping the peace was the same as maintaining the family. My father had always leaned on me to be the adult one, the one who didn't react, the one who absorbed things quietly so that dinners didn't end in arguments. My mother was gentler but no less passive. When Dex said something that landed wrong, she would give me a small apologetic look from across the table, and then ask whether anyone wanted more cranberry sauce. Neither of them had ever told him to stop. I learned early on that trying to defend myself only gave Dex more material, so I stopped trying. I became very good at smiling pleasantly and offering short answers. The cost of that was processing years of comments alone on the 2-hour drive back down the QEII. What my family didn't know, what I had chosen not to tell them, was that my life had changed considerably in the 18 months leading up to that Thanksgiving. The reason I said nothing wasn't shame. It was experience. 2 years before, I had been promoted to senior consultant with a meaningful increase in salary. I was proud enough to mention it during a Sunday call with my mother. Within 2 days, my aunt had phoned to ask whether I might be able to contribute more to the cost of my grandfather's care home supplements. My cousin had texted to ask whether I knew anyone hiring in Calgary, because he was considering expanding his network there. The moment any good news became public inside my family, it stopped belonging to me. It became raw material for someone else to work with. So when my life changed in the ways that mattered most, I said nothing. I met my husband at a project kickoff meeting 18 months earlier. He was the civil engineer representing a municipal contractor on a remediation project I was overseeing. His name is Finn. He had the quality that some people have of being genuinely settled, not suppressed, but actually at ease with himself. He asked precise questions in meetings. He remembered small things I mentioned in passing. He never tried to impress anyone. He simply did the work and let it speak. Around him, I stopped monitoring what I said before I said it. That had been a long time coming. We got married in June. It was small, 14 people in a park in Calgary on a warm evening. catered by a restaurant we loved, wine from a vineyard we had visited together in the Okanagan the previous fall. No reception hall booking, no family politics, no seating chart negotiations. Just the people who had shown up during ordinary Tuesday evenings and already knew who we were to each other. We didn't tell my family. That decision was partly about protecting what we had built, and partly about what I knew would follow an announcement. My mother would feel hurt at not being included. My father would be stiff and formal in the way he got when events moved without his knowledge. And my cousin would find something to say. Some observation about the timing, some question about whether Finn had a pension, some comment about courthouse weddings, and what they said about a couple's seriousness. I didn't want any of that near the best day I had ever had. 3 months after we married, Finn and I bought a house in the southwest part of Calgary, 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard that backed onto a green belt. We closed in September. We had just finished painting the living room the weekend before Thanksgiving. I drove to Edmonton alone that Saturday because Finn had a site visit near Cochrane in the morning and planned to drive up separately, arriving in time for dinner. We had arranged that weeks in advance. He texted me when he left and said he would be there by 6. My mother had been cooking since Friday. The house smelled exactly the way it always did in October, roasting bird, something with sweet potato and brown sugar, the particular cinnamon warmth that I associated specifically with her kitchen in autumn. My aunt and uncle arrived first, then my grandfather's neighbor, who was always included, then Dex and Camille, who were the last to arrive, and somehow always managed to make a late entrance feel intentional. Camille was pleasant. She seemed genuinely thoughtful, asked questions about other people and actually listened to the answers. I felt an uncomfortable awareness knowing she was engaged to someone I had spent years learning not to trust, but that wasn't a problem I could solve that evening. Dinner started on safe ground. Hockey, my uncle's new deck, a neighbor who had sold their house and moved to the island. My father carved the turkey, and everyone helped themselves, and for 1 full hour the gathering felt like what it was supposed to be. Then my cousin asked, with the deliberate casualness of someone who had been waiting for the right conversational opening, whether I was still in that apartment on Elbow Drive. I said yes, I had been in that apartment. He leaned back in his chair, with the expression of someone who had just confirmed a comfortable suspicion. You must be paying through the nose for that now. Calgary rents have gone completely sideways. You'd think after all this time you'd have found a way to just buy something. He glanced around the table to make sure he had the room. No offense, but renting at our age is basically throwing money into a hole. A few people nodded without meaning to. The reflex agreement that happens when someone says something with enough confidence. My aunt murmured something about the market being difficult. My father looked at his plate. I kept my face neutral. I said something brief about the market being competitive and left it there. My cousin wasn't finished. He spent the next several minutes describing, in considerable detail, a basement renovation he and Camille were planning and what it was going to add to their resale value. He talked about their refinancing, their equity position, their 5-year plan. It was the kind of monologue that had the shape of a conversation but operated entirely as a performance. Every few sentences he would glance at me, not to include me, but to use me as a measuring point. Then he set down his fork and said it directly. Still renting? God, Isla, you're 33. The table went quiet in the specific way it does when something lands that everyone heard, but no one is quite sure how to respond to. Not shocked exactly, but collectively suspended. He smiled across at Camille. She did not smile back, I noticed that. I looked at him. Something in me had shifted since the wedding, since the house, since the greenbelt, since Sunday mornings spent reading in rooms that were mine. Whatever had changed, I felt no pull toward making myself smaller. I said without raising my voice, actually, I own a house. The silence this time was entirely different. My cousin laughed, the kind of laugh that buys time. What, since when? We closed in September. He looked at me the way people look when they encounter a fact that doesn't fit the story they've been telling. You bought a house on your own? In Calgary? I waited 1 beat. I didn't buy it on my own. My mother set down the gravy spoon. My father looked up from his plate. My cousin's confidence had developed an uncertain edge. Who did you buy it with? My aunt asked. I checked my phone. 6:07, I said, you can ask him yourself, he should be here in a few minutes. No one quite knew what to do with that. The table resumed talking, but differently, quieter, more conscious of the door. My cousin leaned over to say something low to Camille. She answered in a murmur and did not reach for her wine glass. 12 minutes later, there was a knock at the side entrance. My mother got up. I heard the door open, heard brief voices, and then Finn walked into the dining room carrying 2 bottles of wine, one red, one white, and the easy composure of someone who had been briefed thoroughly on what kind of evening to expect. He found my eyes across the room immediately and smiled. Not a performative smile, just his regular one. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Traffic backed up past the Yellowhead. Must have been an incident near Manning." He set the bottles on the sideboard and came around to me. He kissed me on the cheek and pulled out the empty chair. "I'm Finn," he said to the table. "Isla's husband. I think this is actually the first time I'm meeting most of you." The word husband settled into the room, like something solid dropped into still water. My mother made a small sound. My father set down his fork with a quiet click. My cousin stared without speaking. Camille said, "Oh, congratulations." Her voice was genuine and immediate. She was the first person to speak and I noticed that. Finn thanked her, accepted a plate my mother passed him, and turned to ask my grandfather a question about his garden. My grandfather, who was 81, and had long ago decided that family drama was beneath his interest, talked about his tomatoes for 4 uninterrupted minutes. Finn listened with what appeared to be sincere attention. Meanwhile, the rest of the table processed. My mother leaned toward me and asked quietly, "When?" "June," I said. She nodded slowly. She looked less angry than I had braced for. She looked like someone carefully adjusting the picture they'd been holding in their head. My father, more formal as always, asked how Finn and I had met. Finn explained, clearly and without technical shorthand, the project, the timeline, the way our work had overlapped. My father asked follow-up questions. That alone told me something. My cousin was quiet for longer than I had ever seen him stay quiet at a family dinner. Then he asked, trying for casual and not quite reaching it, "So you two bought a house together?" "We did," Finn said. "Spent last weekend doing the main floor. The backyard is going to be a real project come spring. But that's part of the appeal." My cousin named a neighborhood he thought of as the benchmark for Calgary real estate. Finn named ours. My uncle said it was a nice part of the city. Finn said they'd gotten fortunate with the timing and moved on to something else. That steadiness, the refusal to overclaim, the absence of anything to puncture, was something I had come to recognize in Finn as one of his most disarming qualities. He never inflated. There was nothing to argue with, because he never gave anyone a foothold. My cousin tried once more. He asked Finn whether his work was mostly government contracts. Finn said it varied, municipal, provincial, some federal work, some private sector. He said the mix kept things from getting stale. Then he asked my uncle about his retirement project and the conversation moved on entirely. I watched Camille that evening. I watched her watching my cousin. At one point my aunt mentioned, without any particular intention behind it, that Dex had always described me as someone who never quite had her life sorted out. She said it lightly, the way you repeat something you've heard often enough to assume it's common knowledge. Camille went very still. She turned her head slightly toward my cousin. He did not meet her eyes. After dessert, while the table shifted to the living room and my mother started the kettle, Camille found me in the kitchen. She said she was sorry for some of what she'd heard at dinner. She said she hadn't understood before tonight how much of what she'd been told about me was my cousin's interpretation, rather than any kind of fact. I told her I appreciated hearing that. She asked how long Finn and I had been together. When I told her the full timeline, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with careful phrasing, "He talks about you like you're a cautionary tale, like you've been treading water this whole time." She looked at the door to the living room. "That's clearly not what's been happening." I said, choosing my words, "He tends to sort people into categories early and then find evidence to support the sorting." She was quiet. Then she said, "I've started to notice that." She went back to join the others. I stayed in the kitchen for a moment and listened to the sound of Finn's voice in the next room. I couldn't make out the words, only the register, which was warm and unhurried and completely at ease. I thought about the living room we had just painted together, the backyard that backed onto the greenbelt, the particular light through the kitchen window on Sunday mornings. I felt, standing in my parents' kitchen in Edmonton on a Thanksgiving evening, completely calm. Not the performed calm I had spent years practicing at family dinners, something that required no maintenance at all. My cousin found me in the hallway before he and Camille left. He had his jacket on and his keys in his hand and his voice set at the register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. He said I could have just told everyone that I didn't need to make a production out of it. I said I hadn't made a production out of anything. He had asked a direct question and I had answered it. He said, with an edge he was trying to conceal, "You knew exactly what you were doing." "I knew my husband was on his way," I said. "And I knew the question had a straightforward answer, that's all." He didn't have a response to that. He said he'd see me at Christmas. I said maybe. Camille waved at me from the door. She held my gaze for a second with an expression I understood, something between recognition and a decision still being made. And then they were gone. The house emptied over the next hour. Finn helped my father carry the extra chairs back to the garage. Without being asked, my mother made him a second cup of tea. My grandfather, on his way out, shook Finn's hand and said 2 words, "Good man." In my grandfather's economy of language, that was considerable. When it was just the 4 of us at the kitchen table, my mother asked about the wedding the way she asked about things she genuinely wanted to know. What I had worn, where exactly in the park, who had made the cake. Finn found photos on his phone and passed it to her. She held it carefully and looked at each one for a long time without speaking. My father said very little. He was quiet in the particular way that meant he was feeling something he hadn't found the words for yet. But before we got up to leave, he reached over and briefly put his hand on mine and said, "You look happy in those photographs," and then, after a pause, "I'm glad." That was my father, 3 words meant to last. In the days that followed, messages came in one after another. My aunt called and said she was sorry she had never once corrected the way my cousin spoke about me at family events. She had told herself it was harmless cousin banter, she said, but hearing it all accumulate in one room over one dinner had helped her finally recognize it for what it was. A cousin on my mother's side sent a long message saying she had been thinking about the family dynamic for years and had struggled to name what she kept observing. She said watching what unfolded at Thanksgiving had helped her name it. That message made me cry briefly in the parking lot of a grocery store in a way that surprised me. I heard through my aunt that Camille had asked my cousin directly about several things, about the way he talked about me, about a few other family members, about a pattern she had been turning over in her mind. I don't know the specifics of what was said or how it resolved. I found to my mild surprise that I didn't particularly need to know. Finn and I drove back to Calgary on Sunday with the windows partially down and something easy on the radio. When we turned onto our street and pulled into the driveway, we sat in the car for a moment without speaking. The green belt behind the fence was golden. A neighbor's porch light was already on against the early October dark. "That went reasonably well," Finn said. "That," I said, "is the most optimistic reading of what just happened." He smiled. "Your grandfather approved. Your mother asked about the flowers. Your dad said I was a good man." "He said you were a good man." Close enough. We went inside. The paint smell in the living room had faded to almost nothing. The furniture sat exactly where we had decided to put it, looking the way furniture looks when it belongs. I made tea. Finn turned on the lamp in the corner and sat down with his book. I had spent years after family events doing the same internal accounting, replaying conversations, identifying the moment I should have said something different, measuring how much ground I had lost and what it would take to recover it. I didn't do that now. I sat with my tea and listened to the sound of the house. The furnace running, the low hum of the refrigerator, Finn turning a page. What my cousin had been mocking, I understood finally, was never me. It was a version of me he had constructed early and updated only with evidence that confirmed what he already believed. That wasn't my story. I had never belonged to it, even when I had been too young and too uncertain to say so. The real accounting, I had come to understand, has nothing to do with winning arguments or correcting records at family dinners. It has to do with what you return to when those dinners are over. The people who don't require a managed version of you, the spaces that feel like permission to be exactly who you are, the life that doesn't need defending because it simply, quietly is. For the first time in more years than I could clearly count, I was not keeping track. The greenbelt was dark beyond the back fence. Inside the house the lamp made everything warm. Finn turned a page. I finished my tea. There was nowhere else I needed to be.